One of the important things to state to a meeting like this, although it was said in different ways before, is to talk about the myth of the one-class system of care. Certain leading figures in the private sector, who will remain nameless, James Campbell, put forward the shining notion of one-class system of care and held up our hospital as the hallmark of two classes of care. The intrinsic racism, the hatred for the public sector, I won't deal with that. But this love affair with the one-class system was born, as we all know, because of the advent of huge federal and state subsidies to the poor, and the dream of leveling county hospital and go into the shining tomorrows of private medicine was born. The fact that at their own hospital, the students, no more than a year ago, had to demonstrate against strictly segregated two-class gynae OB services, that doesn't mean much. The fact that they have a health center, so-called, for the poor blacks, and a really shiny office building for the private patients, black or white, who have the bread. We don't have to go into that. But something happened and the dream suddenly came apart. Governor Walker, in his wisdom, started chintzing on the green card, and all the announcements came out. Illinois Masonic, emergencies only. Press St. Luke's, no more elective surgery for green cards. Mercy, other retrenchments. It's the beginning of a wave. The result is that good old county is looking good again, and things are looking up here. I went through the emergency room today as part of my duties as chairman of the Department of Medicine. And the place was jammed and the joint was jumping. The people were at their hospital.
Every one of these experiments show radiation kills. The spread of radiation, with its impact on the germ cells of everybody here and everybody in the world, is sending a secret but nevertheless lethal weapon into the generations that will come. And unless we stop now, this generation will be thought of by all subsequent humans as the killer generation. The poisoning of the land and the poisoning of the seed are unconscionable, and we must bring it to an end.
I want to say a few things that are not very funny, but come from the heart. But first, of course, the most serious thing of all, Len pointed out that we do indeed follow each other in a trail. And every time in the same podium with Studs, he gives out this story that visiting me as a physician is a political event, that I decline to examine the patient, ask any questions, but give long and, of course, highly informative polemics. I want to make it very clear. A couple of people here think that's true. It isn't.
About 50 years ago, it's about right, I got a new patient, and in comes already celebrated Studs Terkel. In his latter years, he talked about death. Maybe us old folks do that. And he, with his hotel background, talked about checking out, a very vivid expression. And I recall a few months ago, he bargained with me, you know, isn't it time for me to go, and so on. I think that's a serious question, not for Studs, for all of us. I don't think it's something that's irrelevant and you can dispense with it. You have to take it very seriously. And I was wondering if I should. Took his blood pressure and finished, and he said, "What was the blood pressure, Doc?" I said, "People in contemplation of death do not want to know what their blood pressure is."
I feel everybody in this room would like that this country would enact this because it's a humane, decent, socially responsible, socially progressive thing in complete alignment with our national experience and with our moral and ethical considerations. We should take care of people with the resources we have to hand. Jim eloquently pointed out, we have the money, twice as much as the next three countries, and far more than twice as much than, say, Canada or Britain. We have the plan, incomparable hospitals, nursing homes, high-tech, maybe too much. And we have superb workforce. Distorted, yes, because of the distortions of the market system. We have way too many specialists, way too many. It's a 70-30 specialist primary care ratio. It probably should be reversed, or at least 60-40. But that can be fixed in 5 years of intelligent educational policy. So we have everything to hand, including, wonder of wonders, all the economic necessities, and we could move forward to the kind of golden tomorrow that Jim was beginning to outline, a society where heavy emphasis on prevention and early detection of illness, of improving quality of life, taking care of long-term care, taking care of mental health, doing all the things we're not doing today at great cost and great tragedy. Let me talk about a magnificent news. I hope you all heard of it. Every single country that has a single-payer system has done so with labor in the vanguard, either the parties of labor, as in Britain, or the trade unions, as in Scandinavia. One way or another, labor made it happen. And they had the California Nurses Association, a highly militant, powerful union that gave Arnold Schwarzenegger what for not too many months ago. They wanted to join the national body and said they will join if you, the AFL Council, support single-payer national insurance. And guess what? They did. And that's a very important new development. I've always felt that labor's participation was a prerequisite. It wasn't going to happen until they came on board. It doesn't mean it will happen because they came on board. We have some hard work, but it's the kind of work that makes sense. And it's the kind of work that this wonderful audience and the other evidences that are happening, the opposition are not going to give up easily. There's too much on the table. We're talking billions and billions of dollars, and all the tools of communication and all the lies and silliness they can go forward, and it'll come forward. In fact, the sign that we're doing better will be the intensity, evil of their opposition to us. Keep that in mind, and don't be a faint heart. They're going to lose. They can't make it. It doesn't work on regular gasoline, and the system that they have put forward for us to live with is counterproductive. Since I started talking, which I know may seem like an eternity ago, but since I started talking, hundreds of Americans have had setbacks in their health system, and that's every minute, whether I'm talking or not. I don't want you to make any... But I think we're entitled to some of the optimism, in characteristic modesty, I self-ridiculed. I think that we can. There are at least a half a dozen states making false starts. Massachusetts was mentioned. Let me give you the real test so that you'll understand what test you must put to any proposal from any source, whether it or not it continues the private insurance participation. Got it? You understand that? And any system that eliminates that, which a single payer does, then you'll be on the road to success. We must commence electing people who support this single payer national health insurance and defeat people who don't. And be very clear. I think the alienation, the polarization, the hate that's filled our country's political discourse will go back as we embrace a social justice theme of the highest order. Thank you very much.
So I would just like to read the title of Quentin's talk then to show you what a fighter he is and what stamina he has now at 88 years of age. The title is Strategy for Saving Public Health Care in the 80s. I'd also like to say that Quentin is really the godfather or midwife to our chapter here in Seattle. And I'd like to give you a very short history of how it got started. In 2005, Hugh Foy and myself were on a medical delegation to Cuba, and Quentin was on it. Quentin challenged Hugh and I, and he said, well, if Seattle is such a great progressive place, how come you don't have a chapter of Physicians for a National Health Program? We mulled that over, and a few months later, along with Erica Goldstein in Hugh's kitchen, we decided to form an exploratory committee, and the rest is history.
When I was in training, the AMA was the dominant voice in American medicine. It had been founded in 1847 in Chicago, and in the 1940s, when I went to college in the Army, the AMA was the ultimate decision maker. So much so that in 1950, the AMA executive director wrote to every dean of every one of the medical schools, telling them to tell the medical students that if they did not withdraw from the Association of Interns and Medical Students, AIMS, that these students would not graduate. And the AMA could do it. The authority was unchallengeable. Indeed, The first defeat the AMA had on health policy was 1965, and what happened then? Medicare, exactly. It was over AMA objection, but Johnson, being very, very skilled, wily politician, made it happen. Now, they were only partially successful. Medicare covers people over 65, and later people who are totally disabled were added to the list. Now, you can tell without much examination that that's the most needy part of our population, people who are elderly or people totally disabled. Indeed, we have a popular idea. Over 69% of Americans, when polled, answer yes to the question, do you support a federal government support through taxes of the health system? 69% of Americans today say yes. This is a change. But what's more interesting and important, you should grasp this fact, doctors now in their majority support single payer. 59% of doctors say yes to that question. But what they've learned, and this is really important, they've learned there's something more fearsome than government. Doctors are a very conservative group and have the usual taboos about government and government answers to questions. But they found out that the corporations are much worse than government. And, well, they were a little late, but I have a reputation for being optimistic, sometimes inappropriately so. But I rather think we'll win this one. American people take seriously their health care and cherish it. And I think, as the Congressman pointed out, there'll be signs of this wish for decent health care. And I do agree with him that it will almost certainly be through the states at first. And if I may give you a brief lesson in American political history, that's how most of the important things we have took place. A state would, a progressive state like Washington or Wisconsin, which is that we have a society that's ready for single payer. But being ready has different stages, and there's a popular idea, and we've had that. Women's suffrage was a popular idea. The end of slavery was a popular idea, but it didn't happen until it became a movement. And that's a real entity that we have to conceive. We are in the foothills, in the base of becoming a movement, a single-payer effort. Right on. See what I mean? It's proven just in this hall. But seriously, that's a concept we should grasp. You folks are the beginning of a movement, in which has to develop fast. Well, good. Take that request or demand from me. I'm glad to give it to you. Well, I've been asked to touch on a few other things, which I'll try and do before I use up all of my time. But it's worth saying that we do derive an enormous advantage from the single-payer movement that we have, which is Medicare. Now, bear in mind, we say improved Medicare. Why? Because while the AMA and its allies couldn't defeat Medicare in 1965, they did some grievous harm. They have co-pays and deductibles which are not economically necessary. And it's obviously a class thing. If you're poor, that co-pay and deductible is ominous, and maybe you're unwilling to seek health care because you can't afford that. And so we have a battle there. So we always say we're for Medicare for everyone, but improved Medicare without the co-pays and deductibles, with a comprehensive preventive program. And I agree with the Congressman completely that several states are going to make it happen first. But I do want to emphasize that in supporting state efforts, and we do, so at least 20 states, this state for sure, our Illinois, where we have introduced the single-payer legislation, but it's far from enactment, and we have to work hard in all of those states. But the whole concept, and it's the take-home message, I think, for this evening, that we're going to enact it in several states. I pray that Washington is among them, and I can see it happening. You have a very progressive tradition. I can't guarantee that this is going to be successful, but I think it will be, and because we've risen to the challenge over the decades. I'm old enough to have been part of the civil rights movement and the anti-war movements, which finally succeeded. But let's not forget women's suffrage in the early part of the last century. And even slavery, although we had a grim war, the American people finally had their popular will expressed. And so it is with the single-payer effort.